The room was silent. Trevor Engelson sat in a chair, the weight of almost 2 decades of memories pressing down on him. He looked straight into the camera, but it was more than a camera. It was a window into a world that had watched every twist of his life, every rumor, every headline, every whisper. At 49, after years of silence, he finally spoke. And what he was about to reveal would send shockwaves through Hollywood gossip circles, tabloids, and social media alike. People think they know, Trevor began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. But the truth is they don't. He paused, the kind of pause that makes the air in the room seem thick, almost unbearable. They think they know why my marriage ended. They have theories, stories, and headlines that they cling to like lifelines. But the reality? The reality is something nobody expected, something I couldn't say until now. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first thing the world needed to understand was this: divorces, even in Hollywood, are rarely simple. They are a collision of love, ambition, fear, and circumstance. And when you marry someone like Meghan Markle, a woman whose life is under constant scrutiny, whose every move is dissected, whose ambitions burn bright and sometimes too fiercely, it changes everything. Trevor had fallen in love with her long before the world had any idea who she was. Before the tabloids, before the royal dreams, before every public judgment and every online conspiracy theory. He remembered the early days of their relationship, the laughter, the connection, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was it. This was love that would last. But love, as he would learn, can be complicated, fragile, and, at times, unbearably heavy. You might be wondering, what could have possibly gone so wrong? What secret could be so personal, so private, so deeply human, that it could alter the course of two people's lives, two people's futures, in a way no one could see coming? The answer, Trevor said, was never about ambition, money, or Hollywood drama. It was never about betrayal or infidelity, though the media tried to frame it that way. It was something more intimate. Something that sat at the core of who they were, who they wanted to be, and the future they dreamed of building together. Trevor leaned back, eyes fixed on the camera, as though it could somehow reach into the minds of every viewer. People like to speculate, he said quietly, almost to himself. They like to fill in the blanks with their imagination. But what they don't realize is that the blanks exist because the truth is messy, personal, painful, and sometimes impossible to talk about. Hollywood gossip had painted a picture of a whirlwind romance, followed by a quiet, amicable split. Publicly, it looked like two young actors who grew apart. But the reality behind closed doors? It was a maze of emotion, misunderstanding, and secrets too heavy to carry. Trevor had spent years carrying the weight of a story no one would understand, until now. Imagine loving someone more than anything, imagining a life together, only to realize that the path you imagined is blocked by circumstances neither of you could control. Trevor continued, his voice now tinged with sorrow. That's what it was like. That's what it still feels like when I think back on it. He remembered the nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gone so wrong, how a love that had felt so strong could fray at the edges. And, perhaps most painfully, how a future he had dreamed about could suddenly feel completely out of reach. This story, he explained, isn't just about a marriage that ended. It's about the human experience, about fear, expectation, and the invisible pressures that sit silently between people. It's about choices, and how those choices can ripple outward, affecting lives in ways no one sees. And, most importantly, it's about secrets. Secrets that, once revealed, can change not just the course of a relationship, but the way the world sees you. Trevor's silence over the years had not been laziness or indifference. It had been protection of himself, of Meghan, of memories that were theirs alone. But time has a way of forcing the truth to the surface. And as the world changed, as Meghan's life took new turns, as the scrutiny intensified, Trevor realized he could no longer remain silent. What I'm about to tell you isn't scandalous in the way tabloids make you think, he said, leaning forward, the intensity in his eyes unmistakable. It's not a story of betrayal or shame. It's a story of fear, of expectation, and of the ways life can challenge even the strongest love. But it's also a story that people need to hear because it shows how real humans navigate impossible circumstances. He took a deep breath, the kind that carries years of unspoken truths, and looked directly into the lens. You're about to hear about moments nobody saw, about conversations that were never meant to be public, about a love that existed, even if it didn't survive. The audience might be asking themselves now, what secret could be so personal that Trevor could never speak of it publicly? What truth about his marriage could shock even those who thought they knew the story? Trevor's answer was simple, yet devastating in its emotional weight. It wasn't about betrayal, he whispered. It wasn't about Hollywood or fame. It was about something that affected the very core of the life we were trying to build together. Something deeply human, something personal, something I can finally talk about now. And just when you think you know where this story is going, Trevor paused again, the kind of pause that leaves you holding your breath. What came next changed everything, and no one saw it coming. That pause, that tension, was only the beginning. Because what you're about to see is a journey through love, ambition, fear, and the invisible pressures that sit silently between two people. It's a story of choices, consequences, and the way life can throw even the strongest plans into chaos. And it all starts with the day Trevor realized something had shifted in their marriage, something that neither of them could ignore. A moment so small on the surface, but so monumental underneath, that it would set the stage for everything that followed. This is not a story about judgment. It's not a story about blame. It's a story about humans, about mistakes, about fear, about dreams deferred. And most importantly, it's a story about what happens when love collides with circumstances too heavy to bear in silence. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why Trevor Engelson chose to speak after all these years. You'll see the pressure, the fear, and the quiet heartbreak that existed behind every smile, behind every public appearance, behind every carefully curated headline. But before that, we have to start at the beginning, at the first cracks in a seemingly perfect romance, at the moments that nobody noticed, but that shaped everything that came after. Because the story of Trevor and Meghan isn't just about divorce. It's about human fragility, it's about fear, it's about courage. And it's about a truth that, for too long, remained buried until now. And the first chapter begins with a moment nobody saw coming, a single turning point that would silently, inexorably, steer their lives toward an outcome neither of them could have imagined. It started like any other day, or at least, that's what Trevor told himself. He woke up in the Los Angeles apartment he shared with Meghan, sunlight slicing through the blinds, dust motes dancing lazily in the morning air. The city was alive outside, oblivious to the private storm brewing inside. And Trevor, at that moment, thought he was simply beginning another day with the woman he loved. But love, he would come to realize, doesn't always announce when it's about to fracture. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits for the smallest crack in a routine to explode into something that changes everything. The first clue had been subtle. A glance that lingered too long on her phone, a pause in conversation that felt unnatural, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Trevor, in those early months, tried to dismiss them as paranoia, as overthinking. He'd been there before with other relationships, the imagination running wild, the mind conjuring shadows where there were none. But deep down, a small, gnawing suspicion began to form. They had been together for several years at this point, navigating the pressures of Hollywood with the relative grace of two people who seemed unshakable from the outside. Parties, premieres, and industry events. They handled them all with a sense of charm and poise that made outsiders believe they were untouchable. But inside, the cracks were forming, quietly, almost invisibly, like tiny fractures in glass that catch the light only when you look closely enough. Trevor remembered the morning vividly. Meghan was unusually quiet over breakfast, her spoon tracing circles in her cereal, as if lost in thought. He asked her what was on her mind. She shrugged, said she was just tired, overworked. But the hesitation in her voice, the avoidance in her eyes, told him something else entirely. Have you ever felt a moment when intuition grabs hold of you? When your gut insists on knowing a truth that your mind refuses to admit? That morning, Trevor felt that tug with a force he hadn't experienced before. Something wasn't right. Something fundamental. The day wore on, and the subtle signs multiplied. A text message left unanswered. A canceled lunch. A lingering sadness in her tone when she finally spoke. By mid-afternoon, Trevor's worry had escalated into anxiety. And then, around 5 p.m., the phone rang. It was a friend, someone who had been close to Meghan long before Trevor met her. The conversation was brief, but loaded with implication. "Trevor," the voice said, hesitant, "I don't know how to tell you this, but I think there's something you need to know. Something Meghan's afraid to share." Trevor froze. His heart pounded. The idea of a secret was not foreign to him. Everyone in Hollywood carries one. But there was a difference between a harmless secret and one that could alter the course of a life. Something about the way his friend said it made his stomach twist. "Tell me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't," the friend replied. "Not yet. She asked me not to. But you need to be prepared." Prepared for what? Trevor asked himself. Prepared for heartbreak? Disappointment? Or something far more complicated, far more personal than anything he could imagine? That night, Trevor returned home and found Meghan sitting alone on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge his presence. He sat down beside her, careful, measured. "Talk to me," he said softly. But she didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she finally looked up, her eyes glistening. There was fear there, yes, but also a profound vulnerability. A kind of vulnerability that makes a person feel both protective and helpless at the same time. "Trevor," she began, her voice trembling. "There's something I've been scared to tell you." He nodded, urging her silently to continue. She swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and for the first time, began to reveal a part of herself she had kept buried. It wasn't about betrayal. It wasn't about someone else. It wasn't about ambition or fame or Hollywood drama. It was something so personal, so intimate, that saying it aloud seemed almost unbearable. Trevor listened, shock and sorrow mingling in equal measure. He wanted to reach out, to say something comforting, but the words caught in his throat. This was bigger than anything he had anticipated, bigger than any challenge they had faced together. And for the first time, he realized that their dreams of the future, the family they had imagined, the life they had planned, might no longer be possible. Have you ever had that moment when reality hits harder than any warning sign? When a truth so intimate, so private, suddenly shifts your entire perspective on someone you love? That night, Trevor felt it in every fiber of his being. The days that followed were tense, filled with careful conversation, tentative attempts to bridge the growing distance. Trevor tried to offer reassurance, tried to convince himself that love could overcome anything. But the shadow of that revelation hung over them like a storm cloud, inevitable and unrelenting. They continued their public life with smiles and appearances, masking the silent tension that had taken root. Friends noticed subtle changes. Meghan was more withdrawn, Trevor more distant. They spoke of normal things, projects, events, Hollywood gossip, but the elephant in the room never left. It was always there, lurking, impossible to ignore. And yet, there were moments of tenderness, moments that reminded Trevor why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. A shared laugh at a joke no one else understood. A quiet evening cooking dinner together. The way she would look at him with warmth and familiarity, despite the fear and tension simmering beneath the surface. Those moments, fleeting as they were a cruel reminder of what might have been lost forever. Then came the weekend that would mark a turning point. They were supposed to have a quiet getaway, just the two of them, a chance to reconnect away from cameras and expectations. But Trevor noticed something immediately. Meghan was distant, distracted, tense. He asked if everything was okay, and she reassured him with a practiced smile. Yet the unease in her eyes betrayed the words she spoke. It was during a walk along the beach, the waves crashing against the shore, that Trevor realized the depth of the divide between them. He watched her, watched the way her hands fidgeted, the way she seemed to shrink into herself. And then it hit him. The full weight of the truth, the realization that the secret she had feared to share might define the rest of their lives. Trevor had always believed that love could conquer any obstacle, that honesty and patience could overcome fear. But that day, standing beside her on the sand, he understood that some challenges are bigger than love alone. Some truths, no matter how painful, cannot be wished away or fixed with reassurance. Have you ever felt powerless in the face of something you care about deeply? That's what Trevor experienced in that moment. A helplessness that gnawed at him, a fear that the life he had imagined was slipping through his fingers. And yet, he couldn't walk away. He couldn't abandon the love that had brought them together. Not yet. They returned from that weekend with a fragile calm, the kind that precedes a storm. Trevor tried to act as if nothing had changed, tried to maintain the life they had built. But he knew, deep down, that their future was uncertain. Every smile, every conversation, every shared glance carried the unspoken tension of the secret looming over them. And then came the first major confrontation. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, intense, a collision of emotions that had been simmering for months. Words were exchanged, some careful, some sharp, but underneath it all was the unspoken truth neither could ignore. Trevor realized in that moment that their marriage had shifted. Something fundamental had changed. And from that point on, nothing would ever be the same. By the end of that week, Trevor understood a truth he could not ignore. Their love, while real, was no longer enough to overcome the challenges ahead. And while he still loved Meghan deeply, he also knew that the path they had envisioned, the life, the family, the shared dreams, might never be possible. What if the person you love most in the world is quietly carrying a fear so private, so intense, that it could change everything you thought you knew about your future together? Trevor Engelson was about to find out. In the weeks following that tense weekend on the beach, the weight of unspoken truths hung heavily between Trevor and Meghan. Every glance, every word, every gesture seemed to carry hidden meaning. Trevor tried to approach her gently, as he always did, but there was a tension in the air he could no longer ignore. "Meghan," he said one evening, as they sat together in their dimly lit apartment, the hum of Los Angeles life buzzing faintly outside. "I need you to be honest with me. Whatever it is, we'll get through it." She looked at him, her eyes betraying vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. There was hesitation there, a fear that speaking would unleash judgment, fear that telling the truth could unravel the life they had built. But Trevor persisted, his voice calm but insistent. "I'm scared, Trevor," she whispered finally, almost to herself. "I'm scared that I can't give you what you want, that I can't be what you need me to be, that I'm not enough." Those words hit Trevor like a punch to the chest. "Not enough?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. "Meghan, you are everything. You've been everything to me." But she shook her head, a quiet desperation in her movements. "It's not that simple," she said. "I've always feared this moment, feared telling you because I didn't want to disappoint you, but the truth is, I don't know if I can ever fulfill that part of our dream." Trevor leaned back, searching her face for clarity, for understanding. He wanted to make sense of what she was saying, to anchor it in reality. And yet, the fear in her eyes told him this wasn't about anger or doubt. It was about something deeper, something she had wrestled with in private for years. The truth, he realized, was something neither of them had anticipated when they first fell in love. It was a fear not about betrayal, not about infidelity, not even about career choices. It was about a personal, intimate aspect of life they had both assumed would be simple. A shared vision of family, a dream of children, a life together built on hopes neither had yet realized could be fragile. Trevor felt a mix of shock and compassion. How had he missed the signs? How had she carried this silently, alone, fearing judgment and disappointment? And yet, he also felt a rising tension within himself, the knowledge that this revelation could alter everything they had planned. In the days that followed, Meghan's anxiety became more palpable. She avoided certain topics, sidestepped conversations about the future, and often seemed lost in thought. Trevor, ever observant, noticed her subtle changes. The way she flinched at casual questions, the small sighs that escaped her lips when she thought he wasn't looking, the way she seemed to shrink into herself in moments of stress. Have you ever watched someone you love struggle silently, knowing that the burden they carry could affect both of your lives, but feeling powerless to help? Trevor felt that helplessness acutely. He wanted to reassure her, to take the weight on himself, to fix the problem. But this was something he couldn't fix. This was something deeply personal, something she had feared sharing, and he could only support her as she navigated her own feelings. Their conversations grew more careful, measured, and sometimes painfully awkward. Trevor tried to broach the subject gently, offering reassurances, trying to remind her that love alone could overcome obstacles. But Meghan's fear was persistent, almost paralyzing. She worried not about him, not about the relationship itself, but about expectations, societal pressures, and the ways the world might judge her if she admitted her struggle. One evening, as they sat quietly on the couch, Trevor watched her, noting every small movement, every fleeting expression. Finally, he asked, "Meghan, is this about the future we imagined? About children?" She looked down, fingers tracing patterns on the fabric of her dress. "Yes," she admitted softly. "It's about that. I've always feared I couldn't give you that, what you dream of. What we dream of." Trevor felt a pang of emotion he could barely articulate. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It wasn't disappointment either. It was a complicated mix of sorrow, empathy, and the dawning realization that some truths, no matter how private or personal, carry weight that changes the very structure of a relationship. The next few weeks were marked by quiet tension. They tried to maintain the life they had built, the appearances that the world expected, the social obligations and events that demanded perfection. But behind closed doors, the anxiety persisted. Trevor noticed the strain on Meghan's face, the subtle avoidance of eye contact when the topic of family came up, and he realized that their love, while real and deep, was being tested in ways neither had prepared for. Have you ever faced a truth so intimate, so personal, that acknowledging it out loud feels like stepping off a cliff without knowing if you'll land safely? That's the space Trevor found himself in. Caught between love, fear, and the realization that the future they envisioned might not be possible. Friends and family noticed changes as well. Close friends whispered about Meghan's withdrawal, about the small anxieties she carried, about the moments of visible stress. Trevor, aware of the scrutiny, felt an added pressure, not from the public, but from knowing that what was private could easily become public. The stakes were higher than ever, and the fear of judgment loomed over every conversation. Trevor tried to find a balance between supporting Meghan, understanding her fears, and protecting his own emotional well-being. But it wasn't easy. Every gesture, every word carried weight. Every decision had consequences, and every day brought the knowledge that their relationship was being tested in ways few people could understand. Then came a pivotal moment. Meghan, after weeks of quiet anxiety, finally confided in him more fully. She spoke of fears, of pressures, of a deep-seated worry that she might never meet the expectations she had set for herself and for their relationship. Trevor listened, holding her hand, trying to absorb the weight of her words. The vulnerability in her voice, the fear behind her eyes, was something he could not ignore. And as he listened, Trevor realized the full magnitude of the challenge before them. It wasn't just about love. It wasn't just about patience or understanding. It was about navigating a deeply personal fear, one that neither of them could control, one that required empathy, compassion, and courage beyond what either had anticipated. By the end of that conversation, Trevor felt a mix of emotions: sorrow for the struggle Meghan carried silently, empathy for her fear, and a dawning understanding that their path forward was far more complicated than he had imagined. He also felt the first stirrings of a decision he would eventually have to make, about whether their love could withstand the pressure of realities they hadn't anticipated when they first fell in love. And just when he thought they might find a way forward, something happened that neither of them saw coming. A small, seemingly innocuous event, a phone call, a message, a passing comment from a friend, threatened to push the delicate balance of their relationship into chaos. It was subtle, yet monumental, and it was only the beginning. Because in the world of Trevor and Meghan, no secret, no fear, and no hope could remain hidden forever. And the next revelation, the next twist in their story, would challenge everything Trevor thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the future they had envisioned together. Hollywood is a place where dreams are made, or broken, often before you even realize what's happening. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, their love story had once felt like a fairy tale set against that glitzy backdrop. Red carpets, exclusive parties, movie premieres, and glamorous gatherings made it seem as if their lives were lifted from the pages of a magazine. Yet beneath the lights and cameras, reality had a way of seeping in, uninvited, insidious, and unavoidable. Trevor began noticing it slowly. At first, it was small things. Meghan's schedule filling up faster than they could keep track of, last-minute meetings and auditions, an endless stream of emails and calls from agents and producers. At the time, he tried to embrace her ambition. He had fallen in love with a woman of drive, of talent, of energy and vision. That energy had captivated him in the beginning. But ambition, he would learn, has its costs. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where your love for someone collides with their dreams, and suddenly you're left wondering whether you're part of the plan, or just a placeholder until the dream is realized? That was Trevor's reality. The Hollywood dream that once thrilled him began to feel like a barrier, a wedge between them. Every opportunity Meghan pursued required her time, her energy, and often, her emotional availability. And while he supported her in every way he could, there were moments when the gap between their lives felt unbridgeable. Trevor remembered one particularly frustrating afternoon. Meghan had just returned from an audition, exhilarated and brimming with excitement about a potential role that could change everything. She spoke animatedly, her eyes sparkling with hope about the script, the director, the possibilities. And Trevor, smiling and nodding, felt a pang in his chest. A mixture of pride and apprehension. He wanted to be happy for her. He truly did. But a whisper of fear ran through him. How many of these opportunities would come at the cost of the life they had envisioned together? How many would take her further away from the quiet, personal dreams they had once shared? Hollywood has a way of demanding sacrifices, often in ways that aren't immediately obvious. For Meghan, it was time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. For Trevor, it was patience, understanding, and the quiet hope that love could survive the pressures surrounding them. And as the weeks turned into months, he realized that their ambitions, once complementary, were starting to diverge. There were nights when Trevor would lie awake, listening to the hum of the city, imagining a life where things were different, where schedules were flexible, where dreams were shared instead of competing, where love could exist without the relentless glare of cameras, without the constant judgment of the world watching. He began to understand that love in Hollywood is rarely simple, rarely easy, rarely protected from the world outside. One evening, Trevor decided to confront the reality head-on. They were sitting in their apartment, quiet except for the faint sound of traffic below. He took a deep breath and said, "Meghan, I know you're chasing your dreams, and I want you to. But I need to know, are we building a life together, or are we just trying to coexist while chasing separate paths?" Meghan looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of frustration, sadness, and determination. "Trevor, I love you. I love us. But sometimes I feel like the life we imagined doesn't exist. Not yet, and maybe not the way we hoped." That simple exchange carried the weight of months, perhaps years, of unspoken tension. Every word was loaded with meaning. Every pause was a silent acknowledgement of the distance growing between them, not just physically, but emotionally. Trevor realized that this was more than just the typical struggles of a relationship in Hollywood. This was about the collision of dreams versus reality, about the ways life's pressures can subtly, invisibly, drive a wedge between two people who once believed in a shared future. And as he watched Meghan pace the apartment, absorbed in thought, he felt the first real pangs of doubt. Could love survive when the world around you pulls in one direction and the heart pulls in another? The next few months were a series of highs and lows. Meghan landed roles that thrilled her professionally but strained their personal connection. Trevor tried to be supportive, attending premieres, celebrating her victories, masking his own growing unease. He wanted to believe that love would bridge the gap, that patience and understanding could counterbalance ambition. But the cracks were widening, and he could no longer ignore them. Have you ever tried to hold two worlds together at once, only to realize that they are incompatible? That was Trevor's struggle, balancing his own expectations and desires with the unstoppable momentum of Meghan's Hollywood career. Every achievement she earned, every milestone she celebrated, was tinged with a bittersweet feeling he couldn't shake. Pride mixed with a sense of distance, admiration with longing, love with fear. Friends began noticing subtle changes as well. Dinner conversations that were once filled with laughter became careful, measured. Social events were navigated with polite smiles rather than genuine joy. Behind the glamour, the emotional weight of their diverging paths grew heavier. And yet, neither of them spoke openly about the most pressing issue: their shared dreams of family, the hope that had initially bonded them. Trevor remembered an evening when they attended a Hollywood gala together. Photographers clicked away, capturing smiles and laughter that belied the tension beneath the surface. But backstage, away from the cameras, a quiet conversation erupted. Meghan admitted her fear that time was slipping away, that her ambitions might overshadow their private dreams. Trevor, in turn, admitted his own fear, that he was losing her, not to someone else, but to the very life they had both pursued. That night, they sat on a balcony overlooking the city lights, the weight of their unspoken concerns pressing down on them. "I don't want to lose us," Trevor whispered. "But I don't know if we can survive the path we're on." Meghan didn't answer immediately. She looked out over the horizon, the lights reflecting in her eyes, and for a long moment, there was silence. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe we've been chasing different versions of happiness. And maybe that's okay. But it doesn't make it any easier." It was the first time Trevor truly understood the magnitude of their challenge. Love alone could not resolve the tension between ambition and expectation, between personal fear and shared dreams. Their journey, which had once seemed simple and straightforward, was now fraught with complexity, uncertainty, and emotional strain. And then came the pivotal moment that would define the rest of their relationship. A phone call from a close friend, meant to provide support, instead revealed a new layer of pressure. Meghan, ever ambitious, had received an opportunity that could catapult her career even further. But it came with a cost: time away, intense scrutiny, and the implicit expectation that she would continue to prioritize career over personal life. Trevor felt the weight of the choice before them. They could continue down the same path, risking further emotional distance, or confront the growing tension head-on and face the reality that their dreams might not align. It was a choice that would test the very foundation of their relationship, and one that would ultimately determine whether their love could survive the pressures of Hollywood and the expectations they carried for each other. By the end of that night, Trevor understood something he had avoided for months. Love is not enough when ambition and personal fears collide. The dream of a shared future, once so vivid, was now clouded by reality. And while he still loved Meghan deeply, he knew that the challenges ahead would force decisions neither of them were fully prepared to make. But the moment of confrontation, of decision, was still to come. And when it arrived, it would change the course of both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. What Trevor didn't yet realize was that the path they were on would soon collide with the most personal, private fear Meghan had ever held. And that fear, once fully revealed, would test their love to its breaking point. Sometimes, a single moment can alter the course of a life. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, that moment came in the form of a letter. Not a text message, not an email, not a hastily scribbled note, but a carefully written, intimate letter that carried more weight than either of them could have anticipated. It was a quiet evening when Trevor found it. He had returned from a long day on set, hoping to unwind and reconnect with Meghan. Their relationship had been a delicate balance lately, teetering between love and the growing tension that neither wanted to face directly. But that evening, he sensed something was different. The apartment felt heavy with silence, Meghan's presence quiet yet deliberate. He found the letter on the kitchen counter, neatly folded, almost ceremonial in its presentation. No envelope, no preamble, just her handwriting on thick, unassuming stationery. Curiosity and a pang of apprehension urged him to pick it up. Trevor paused. Should he read it? Should he wait? His gut told him that whatever was written there would not be ordinary. And yet, he couldn't resist. Slowly, he unfolded the paper, the texture almost tactile in his hands, and began to read. From the first lines, his heart sank. Meghan's words were measured, delicate, and intensely personal. She spoke of fears she had carried for years, fears that she had never voiced aloud. She wrote about love, about dreams deferred, and about the silent burden of expectations that weighed on her every day. Trevor, the letter began, there is a part of me I have never shared with anyone. A part one have hidden not because I am ashamed, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, if the world knew, everything we've built could crumble. Trevor's hands trembled slightly. He had known Meghan to be guarded, to protect parts of herself, but nothing prepared him for the depth of vulnerability on those pages. Every word reflected not just fear, but an awareness of the consequences that her revelation could have on their life together. She continued, detailing a deeply personal struggle, one that went beyond the ordinary stresses of ambition, fame, or public scrutiny. It was an intimate, biological reality, something that affected the very foundation of the life they had envisioned, the family they had dreamed of creating together. Trevor's mind raced. He had suspected that there were fears, small or large, that Meghan had been carrying, but the letter made it undeniable, explicit. The implications were profound. Their plans, their dreams, their shared vision of the future, all of it suddenly felt precarious. The letter was not accusatory. It was not dramatic. It was simply the honest confession of someone who had loved deeply and feared the consequences of that love. She wrote of longing, of hope, and of guilt. Guilt for potentially disappointing him. Guilt for carrying a secret that could change everything. Guilt for the emotional strain that both of them were now facing. Trevor read and reread the lines, each word sinking deeper than the last. He felt a mix of emotions: empathy, sorrow, a flicker of fear, and an aching love for the woman who had entrusted him with such a delicate truth. It was the kind of revelation that forces a person to confront not just the other's reality, but their own expectations, their own desires, their own vulnerabilities. Have you ever held a letter in your hands that made you feel simultaneously closer to someone and further away than ever before? That was Trevor's experience. He could feel Meghan in every sentence, her voice almost audible in the rhythm of the words. Yet at the same time, the content of the letter created a divide that he could not ignore. As he absorbed the gravity of her words, he realized that their marriage had reached a pivotal moment. The choices they made now would define the trajectory of their relationship. Would they confront the reality together, openly and honestly, or would the weight of unspoken fears and expectations slowly pull them apart? Trevor sat in silence long after reading the letter. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside, a reminder that the world continued, oblivious to the private storm unfolding within their apartment. He thought of all the years they had spent together, of the laughter, the love, the shared ambitions, and the dreams that now seemed threatened by a reality neither had anticipated. He thought of conversations they hadn't had, nights spent avoiding the topic out of fear, and moments where both had pretended that everything was fine. And he realized that the letter was both a confession and an invitation, a plea for understanding, for compassion, for shared navigation of a difficult truth. The weight of the letter pressed heavily on Trevor's mind. How could he respond? How could he balance love with the practical realities of life, ambition with personal fears, desire with limitations? And, most importantly, how could they move forward without the dream of family being irreversibly impacted? In that moment, Trevor understood that their story had entered a new chapter, one that required courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront truths that were uncomfortable, frightening, and deeply personal. One that would test their bond in ways that neither of them had imagined when they first fell in love. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back on the counter, knowing that their next conversation would be the most important they had ever had. It wasn't just about words. It was about choices, about understanding, about confronting a reality that would shape the rest of their lives. But before that conversation could happen, external pressures, the scrutiny of friends, family, and the ever-watchful eyes of Hollywood would begin to encroach, adding layers of tension, misunderstanding, and fear. Trevor sensed it coming, a ripple effect of the revelation, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same. Because once a secret is written, once a truth is acknowledged, the world can no longer remain untouched. And the path forward, while uncertain, demanded that they face it together or risk losing everything they had built. The question now wasn't just about love, it was about survival. Could their marriage withstand the combination of Hollywood dreams, personal fears, and the intimate, deeply human truth that Meghan had finally revealed? And what Trevor didn't yet know was that the letter was only the beginning. What came next would force decisions, confrontations, and realizations that neither of them were fully prepared to face. And it would ultimately define the end of their story in ways that shocked everyone who thought they knew it. There are moments in life when you realize that everything you thought was stable is, in fact, fragile. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, that moment came not through whispers, not through letters, but through a conversation that would forever alter the trajectory of their marriage. It was a Sunday evening, quiet except for the distant hum of the Los Angeles traffic outside. Trevor had read Meghan's letter multiple times, each reading digging deeper into the raw, vulnerable truth she had finally entrusted to him. Yet, no matter how many times he read the words, nothing prepared him for the confrontation that would follow. Meghan entered the room, tense, aware of the gravity of the moment. Trevor could feel it, the way her shoulders stiffened, the subtle bite of her lip, the hesitation in her steps. She sat across from him, eyes locked with his, searching, vulnerable, fearful of the response she might receive. Trevor took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Meghan," he began, his voice calm but heavy, "I read your letter. I understand everything you wrote, but we need to talk. Honestly, openly. Can we do that?" She nodded, almost imperceptibly, a tremor in her hands betraying the tension beneath her composed exterior. And so it began, the conversation that would change everything. Meghan spoke first, her voice soft but firm, trembling only slightly. She articulated the fears she had buried for years, the anxiety that she might never be able to conceive, the shame she feared she would face if it became public, the pressure of Hollywood's expectations layered on top of personal struggles. Every word was measured, every phrase weighted with emotion. Trevor listened intently, absorbing each revelation, each hesitation. But as the conversation deepened, he felt the creeping awareness that this was more than just a discussion. It was a turning point. They were no longer merely partners navigating a relationship. They were two people confronting the collision of dreams, expectations, and deeply personal realities. Have you ever had a conversation that felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that a single misstep could change everything? That was the precarious position Trevor found himself in. One wrong word, one misinterpreted phrase, could fracture the trust that still existed between them. Trevor responded, carefully, with empathy and honesty. He expressed his love, his desire to support her, his commitment to navigating whatever challenges they faced together. "Meghan," he said, voice steady but tender, "I love you. That's never been in question. But this is a lot. I need to understand fully, and I need to know that we're on the same page about the future." Meghan's eyes glistened with tears, the vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long now laid bare. She admitted that she had feared his reaction, had worried that this truth might drive a wedge between them permanently. She confessed to nights spent awake, wrestling with the shame of not meeting expectations she believed were universal, expectations imposed by society, by the industry, and by her own fears. Trevor felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Sorrow for her struggle, empathy for her fear, and a deep, unsettling anxiety about what this meant for their shared future. He wanted to reassure her, to promise that love could conquer all. But deep down, he knew that some realities, no matter how much love exists, carry consequences that cannot simply be wished away. The conversation escalated as they delved into the heart of their shared dreams, family, children, the life they had imagined together. Meghan spoke candidly about the medical realities, her personal fears, and the intense pressure of balancing career and private life. Trevor, in turn, spoke about his hopes, his desire for a family, and the uncertainty he now faced. Every sentence carried weight. Every pause was heavy with the tension of unspoken fears. Friends and colleagues could never understand the intensity of such a discussion because it was not about fame or money or career. It was about the most intimate, personal dreams two people could share. As the night wore on, the conversation became more intense. Meghan admitted that she had hoped for a solution that might satisfy both their dreams, but feared that no such solution existed. Trevor acknowledged the same, realizing that their visions of the future might now be incompatible. They were standing at a crossroads, and every path carried uncertainty, fear, and emotional risk. The conversation took a sharper turn when Trevor asked the question that had been gnawing at him since reading the letter. "Meghan, are we talking about something medical? Something permanent?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I've always been scared to tell you because I didn't want you to feel trapped, or to be disappointed, or to hate me for something I can't control." Trevor's mind reeled. The reality of what she was saying, the implications, were staggering. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, but also of unavoidable clarity. The dream they had shared, of building a family together in the traditional sense, was now facing a challenge neither could ignore. For hours, they spoke, cried, and tried to navigate the impossible. They weighed love against practicality, desire against reality, hope against the inevitability of biological limitations. The conversation was raw, emotional, and unfiltered. Every sentence pushed them closer to the edge of an unthinkable decision. Trevor realized something crucial in that moment. Love, as powerful as it was, could not simply erase reality. There were constraints, challenges, and deeply personal truths that demanded acknowledgement. And while his heart yearned to stay, to support, to believe that love alone could conquer all, his mind understood the stakes. The practical, emotional, and social consequences of the truth Meghan had revealed. Have you ever faced a truth that forces a choice between love and reality? That is precisely what Trevor was confronting. Every ounce of empathy, every fiber of love, every hope for the future collided with an unchangeable reality that required careful consideration and courage. By the end of the night, neither of them spoke of decisions yet to be made. The conversation had shattered illusions, forced honesty, and laid bare the vulnerabilities they had both tried to protect. It was a turning point, a line crossed from which there would be no return to naivety. And just as Trevor thought the night could not become any heavier, a sudden realization hit him. The world outside their apartment, the friends, the family, the relentless Hollywood gaze, was not just a backdrop. It would begin to influence every choice, every conversation, every next step they took. The private struggle they had just confronted would inevitably become entwined with public pressures, expectations, and judgments. And with that realization came an even darker fear. The decisions they now faced would not just affect their marriage, but the trajectory of their lives, their identities, and their dreams in ways they could not yet foresee. Decisions. They are the moments in life that define us, that shape the paths we walk, and that leave ripples long after the choice has been made. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, the decision they faced was one that few could understand, and fewer still could have predicted. It wasn't about career, fame, or public image. It was about the deepest, most intimate parts of life: love, family, and the future they had imagined together. After that long, shattering conversation, Trevor and Meghan retreated into their private worlds. Days passed, each filled with heavy silences, brief exchanges, and a quiet, shared understanding that a decision loomed over them like a shadow. Neither spoke of it directly, and yet the unspoken weight was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every movement, every choice carried the tension of that unresolved question. What now? Trevor spent hours thinking, analyzing, questioning. He loved Meghan deeply, more deeply than he had ever loved anyone. But he also knew that their shared dream of building a family in the traditional sense was now uncertain. Could they redefine their life together without the element that had once seemed essential? Could love alone bridge that gap, or would the absence of a shared dream eventually erode even the strongest affection? Have you ever faced a choice where every option carries a cost, where every path seems to demand a sacrifice of the heart? That was Trevor's reality. Meghan, on her side, wrestled with guilt, fear, and uncertainty. She loved Trevor. She always had. But the weight of the secret she had revealed, the intimate truth about her inability to conceive, pressed heavily upon her. It wasn't just a personal reality. It was a potential fracture in the life they had imagined. She feared disappointment, feared judgment, feared that Trevor might see her differently now, even if he never voiced it. The decision wasn't simple. It wasn't something that could be postponed indefinitely, nor could it be ignored. It required honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront the impossible. Trevor and Meghan had reached a crossroads, and the path they chose would define everything that followed. One evening, after weeks of silent reflection, they sat together in the apartment that had once felt like a sanctuary. The city lights glimmered outside, oblivious to the storm inside. Meghan turned to Trevor, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Trevor," she said softly, "we need to decide. I can't go on pretending, and I know you can't either. We need to face the reality of what this means, for us, for our future." Trevor nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know," he replied quietly. "And I've been thinking a lot. About love, about life, about what we want, what we need. And I think we need to accept the truth, whatever that looks like. No illusions, no pretenses." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of those words settling over them. And then Meghan, with tears streaming down her cheeks, spoke the words that would define the next chapter of their lives. "Trevor, maybe the best thing for us is to go our separate ways. To accept that our paths, while connected in love, may not be aligned in the life we imagined." Trevor felt a mixture of shock, sorrow, and an odd sense of clarity. It wasn't anger. It wasn't betrayal. It was the realization that sometimes love isn't enough when life presents realities that cannot be reconciled. He looked at Meghan, truly looked at her, and saw not weakness, but courage. Courage to face a truth that many would run from. Courage to confront the impossibility of their shared dream with honesty and dignity. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that letting go felt like the ultimate act of love itself? That was Trevor's realization. By choosing to accept the reality, by choosing to part ways, he was not abandoning Meghan. He was honoring both their lives, their dreams, and the love they had shared. The days that followed were filled with quiet, painful preparations. Legal consultations, emotional conversations, and the logistical realities of separating a life built together. Friends and family watched from the sidelines, some supportive, some bewildered, but few could understand the depth of emotion behind every decision. Trevor and Meghan handled it privately, with care, with grace, and with a mutual understanding that their love, while transformed, would not be erased. They acknowledged the pain, the loss, and the impossibility of the dream they had once shared. But they also acknowledged the love, the respect, and the compassion that remained. In the months that followed, the world would later speculate, analyze, and sensationalize. Headlines would hint, rumors would swirl, and public curiosity would reach a fever pitch. But in the quiet reality of their lives, Trevor and Meghan had made a choice that few would ever fully understand. A choice defined not by drama, but by honesty and the courage to confront the unchangeable truth. Trevor would later reflect on that moment, on the decision that no one expected. He realized that true love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go, about embracing reality, and about understanding that the life you imagined with someone might not align with the life they are able to give. And while the world would never see the intimate discussions, the tears, or the emotional negotiations that led to their separation, the decision itself became the defining moment of their relationship, a turning point that would shape both their futures in ways neither could have predicted. Yet even as the separation unfolded, Trevor could not ignore the subtle, lingering questions. Could their love have survived if circumstances were different? Was there another path, another choice, another compromise they hadn't yet considered? And most importantly, what would the world think when the truth finally came to light? Because in the end, their personal reality was about to collide with public scrutiny, and what came next would shock everyone who thought they understood the story. In Hollywood, nothing stays private for long. A single decision, a whispered rumor, or a fleeting glance can spiral into a worldwide spectacle. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, the private choice they had made, to separate, to face an unchangeable truth, would soon collide with the relentless glare of public scrutiny. It started subtly. A casual comment from a friend, shared in confidence, leaked to a journalist who specialized in celebrity gossip. At first, it was minor, vague speculation about tension in their marriage, rumors that something might be off. Trevor and Meghan tried to ignore it, hoping the story would fade, hoping the truth could remain theirs alone. But in Hollywood, hope is rarely enough. Within days, the whispers grew louder. Headlines began to appear on websites, each one more sensational than the last. Hollywood power couple splits. Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle's secret struggle. Family dreams collide with fame. The untold story of Meghan Markle. Trevor stared at the headlines, his stomach churning. Meghan, too, felt the weight of each news story, each insinuation, each comment that suggested that their private lives were now public property. The media, relentless as ever, began piecing together fragments of the story. Conversations overheard, sources with varying degrees of credibility, and speculative insider claims painted a narrative that was only loosely connected to reality. Yet the public, always hungry for scandal, devoured every word. Every rumor, every half-truth, every insinuation became a part of a larger, swirling storm. Have you ever felt the pressure of the world watching your every move, analyzing every word, every gesture, every choice? That was the reality for Trevor and Meghan. Their love, their struggles, their intimate challenges, suddenly, they were no longer private matters. They were headlines, clickbait, and gossip fodder. Trevor struggled with anger and helplessness. He wanted to protect Meghan, to shield her from the relentless speculation, but the more he tried, the more the story seemed to grow. The media thrives on drama, and the ambiguity of their separation became the perfect storm. Every carefully measured silence was interpreted as evidence of deceit, every public appearance scrutinized for hints of guilt or tension. Meghan, for her part, found the intrusion unbearable. She had already carried the weight of deeply personal fears, and now the world seemed to demand her vulnerability as entertainment. Friends noticed the strain, the quiet tension in her voice during phone calls, the anxious glances at social media, the moments when she would retreat from cameras and reporters with a practiced, controlled smile. But inside, the pressure was crushing. The tabloids escalated quickly. One outlet ran a speculative piece claiming that Trevor had learned the truth about Meghan's inability to conceive months earlier and had been secretly planning to leave her. Another claimed that Meghan had hidden a devastating secret from Trevor, framing her as deceitful and manipulative. Neither story was true, but in Hollywood, facts often take a back seat to the narrative the public craves. Trevor and Meghan faced not just public scrutiny, but private judgment from friends, colleagues, and acquaintances. Questions that had once been innocuous. Are you planning a family soon? Or when will you settle down? Now felt loaded, invasive, and impossible to answer without revealing private truths. Every interaction became a minefield, every conversation a potential headline. And then came the first wave of direct confrontation. Paparazzi, sensing the tension, began staking out their favorite locations, snapping photos of seemingly ordinary interactions and spinning them into sensationalized stories. Trevor's lunch meetings, Meghan's walks in the park, casual gatherings with friends, all were reinterpreted as evidence of marital discord, betrayal, or scandal. The pressure was relentless. Trevor felt the weight of expectation, the constant scrutiny, and the creeping fear that no private choice could ever remain private. Meghan felt it too, the exhaustion of performing in public while managing private heartbreak, the relentless anxiety that every move might be twisted into a narrative of scandal. Have you ever felt trapped between personal truth and public perception? That was their reality. Every decision, every word, every step was analyzed, judged, and reported, often in ways that bore little resemblance to reality. Yet in the midst of the storm, there were moments of clarity. Trevor and Meghan leaned on each other in quiet, private moments, reaffirming their mutual respect, compassion, and understanding. They knew that the world outside might never see the truth, but within the walls of their shared space, they still had honesty, empathy, and a bond forged through love and trials. Still, the media storm intensified. Headlines began to speculate on the most intimate details, including the deeply personal truth Meghan had revealed in her letter. Rumors swirled, suggesting medical issues, fertility struggles, and private decisions, each twisted into a story designed to shock and sell. Trevor felt his patience stretch to the breaking point. He wanted to correct the narrative, to defend Meghan, to explain the truth, but every attempt to clarify seemed only to fuel further speculation. And as the world watched, hungry for drama, the couple realized a painful truth. In Hollywood, some stories are impossible to control. Once a private revelation becomes public, it takes on a life of its own, untethered from fact, amplified by curiosity, and often cruelly distorted.